Autonomy of the state, what the state is not. The state is almost universally considered an institution of social service. Some theories venerate the state as an apotheosis of society, others regard it as amiable, though often inefficient, organization for achieving social ends, but almost all regard it as a necessary means for achieving the goals of mankind, a means to be ranged against the quote-unquote private sector, and often winning in this competition of resources. With the rise of democracy, the identification of the state with society has redoubled, until it is common to hear sentiments expressed which violate virtually every tenet of reason and common sense, such as "we are the government." The useful collective term "we" has enabled an ideological camouflage to be thrown over the reality of political life. If we are the government, then anything a government does to an individual is not only just and untyrannical, but also voluntary on the part of the individual concerned. If the government has incurred a huge public debt, which must be paid by taxing one group for the benefit of another, this reality of burden is obscured by saying that we owe it to ourselves. If the government conscripts a man or throws him into jail for dissident opinion, then he is only doing it to himself, and therefore nothing untoward has occurred. Under this reasoning, any Jews murdered by the Nazi government were not murdered. Instead, they must have committed suicide, since they were the government, which was democratically chosen. And therefore, anything the government did to them was voluntary on their part. One would think it is necessary to belabor this point, yet the overwhelming bulk of people hold this fallacy to a greater or lesser degree. We must, therefore, emphasize that we are not the government. The government is not us. The government does not in any accurate sense represent the majority of people, but even if it did, even if 70% of the people decided to murder the remaining 30%, this would still be murder and would not be voluntary suicide on the part of the slaughtered minority. No organicist metaphor, no relevant bromid that we are all part of one another must be permitted to obscure this basic fact. If then the state is not us, if it is not the human family getting together to decide mutual problems, if it is not a lodge meeting or a country club, what is it? Briefly, the state is the organization in society which attempts to maintain a monopoly on the use of force and violence in a given territorial area. In particular, it is the only organization in society that obtains its revenue not by voluntary contribution or payment for services rendered, but by coercion, while other individuals or institutions must obtain their income by production of goods and services, and by the peaceful and voluntary sale of these goods and services to others. The state obtains its revenue by the use of compulsion, that is, by the use of and the threat of jailhouse and the bayonet. Having used force and violence to obtain its revenue, the state generally goes on to regulate and dictate and the other actions of its individual subjects. One would think that the simple observation of all states through history and over the globe would be proof enough of this assertion, but the mythmania of myth has lain so long over state activity that elaboration is necessary. What the state is. Man is born naked into the world, and needing to use his mind to learn how to take the resources given him by nature and transform them, for example, by investment in capital, into shapes and forms and places where the resources can be used for the satisfaction of his wants and the advancement of his standard of living. The only way by which man can do this is by the use of his mind and energy to transform resources, production, and to exchange these products for products created by others. Man has found that through the process of voluntary mutual exchange, the production and hence the living standards of all participants in exchange may increase enormously. The only natural course for man to survive and to obtain wealth, therefore, is by using his mind and energy to engage in the production and exchange process. He does this first by finding natural resources and transforming them, by mixing his labor with them, as Locke puts it, to make them his individual property. and then by exchanging this property for similarly obtained property of others. The social path dictated by the requirement of man's nature, therefore, is the path of property rights and the free market of gift or exchange of such rights. Through this path, men have learned how to avoid the jungle methods of fighting over scarce resources so that A can only acquire them at the expense of B, and instead to multiply those resources enormously in peaceful and harmonious production and exchange. The great German sociologist Franz Oppenheimer pointed out that there are only two mutually exclusive ways of acquiring wealth. One, the above way of production and exchange, he called the economic means. The other way is simpler in that it does not require productivity. It is the way of seizure of another's goods or services by the use of force and violence. This is the method of one-sided confiscation, or theft, of the property of others. This is the method that Oppenheimer termed the political means to wealth. It should be clear that the peaceful use of reason and energy in production is the natural path for man, the means for his survival and prosperity on earth. It should be equally clear that the coercion, exploitive means is contrary to the natural law. It is parasitic, for instead of adding production, it subtracts from it. The political means siphons production off to a parasitic and destruction individual or group, and the siphoning only subtracts from the number producing, but also lowers the producer's incentive to produce beyond his own subsistence. In the long run, the robber destroys his own substance by dwindling or eliminating the source of his own supply. But not only that, even in the short run, the predator is acting contrary to his own true nature as a man. We are now in this position to answer more fully the question, what is the state? The state, in the words of Oppenheimer, is the organization of the political means. It is a systemization of the predatory process over a given territory. For crime, at best, is sporadic and uncertain. The parasitism is imperial, and the coercive parasitic lifeline may be cut at any time by the resistance of the victims. The state provides a legal, orderly, systematic channel for the predation of private property. It renders certain, secure, and relatively peaceful the lifeline of the parasitic caste in the society. Since production must always precede predation, the free market is an interior to the state. The state has never been created by a social contract. It has always been born in conquest and exploitation. The classic paradigm was a conquering tribe passing in its time-honored method of looting and murdering a conquered tribe. To realize that the time span of plunder would be longer and more secure, and the situation more pleasant, if the conquered tribe were allowed to live and produce, with the conquerors settling among them as the rulers, exacting a steady annual tribute. One method of the birth of the state may be illustrated as follows. In the hills of southern Ruthenia, a bandit group managed to obtain physical control over a territory, and finally the bandit chieftain proclaims himself king of the sovereign and independent government of South Ruthenia. And if he and his men have forced to maintain this rule for a while, lo and behold, a new state has joined the family of nations, and the former bandit leaders have been transformed into the lawful nobility of the realm.